Dr. Taz, it's such a pleasure to have you on today. I know we've been trying to get this all
Yes.
together, so we're all here. We're excited about this conversation. We've been so inspired about how you have combined multiple modalities, whether it's Chinese medicine, acupuncture, Ayurveda, and integrative medicine in your work. But I know that always wasn't the case, and that came from your own personal journey. So I'm curious, can you talk a little bit more about your health challenges and what really made you look at things differently?
Definitely. I mean, I always have said that this has been a complete accidental journey. It's not anything I planned or strategized about. It was literally like kind of bumbling my way into this. And I think it started in my 20s, where as I finished residency and started my first job, I probably had a lot of symptomology that I was ignoring. But when I set in and started working the ER, which was sort of my first, overall work experience as a physician, and I guess flip-flopping the days and nights and doing all that business, my health just started to decelerate very quickly. And it was all a lot of what my patients experience today too, right? A lot of randomness, a lot of weird symptoms, a lot of stuff that you try to ignore and try to power through, and I think we all think magically things are going to go away, especially at that age, right? We think we're invincible, but it kind of came to a crashing halt, when it just got to a point that I not only noticed it, but the people around me and even patients in the emergency room were noticing it, because a lot of people were repeat kind of folks coming back through there. And so it was everything from like hair loss and joint pain and fatigue and low grade depression, gaining weight, all of these things that, technically by themselves are not a big deal, but when you put them all together, they really change how you feel, how you look, how you think, like all the things that kind of make me who I am. And I think it was finally sort of my husband and my mom, who we were dating at the time, but it kind of sat me down and be like, I think you need to go get this checked out. Something's off. You're not yourself. And so I did just that. And that journey, I've told the story so many times and written about it and spoken about it, but that journey was just very hopeless is probably the best way to describe it. It was just, be bouncing from doctor to doctor, being told I was like stressed or I was anxious or I was depressed or, my hours were off or whatever it was that they had to say. And meanwhile, I'm losing hair. It's like super obvious. Like my crown, is completely obvious through this process. And so finally I went to a hair loss specialist who put me on a medication. It's a medication that I even prescribe to this day. But for me, the dosing and the side effects were so strong that I was going one day to work out, passed out, after a workout and taking that medication while I was driving, and ended up getting into a car accident. But that moment was very much my aha moment of like, okay, what I'm doing is not working. It's been, I think it was close to a year at that point, maybe even longer, probably 8 to 10 doctor's visits. It's not easy to go to the doctor, as we all know. It's time away from work and all this other stuff. So, I think in that moment, like, I've got to figure this out. I've got to figure out what's going on with me. And so that started kind of my quest. And it's kind of like opening a Pandora's box, and like you just keep digging and digging away. And there's this whole underworld that you don't even know about. And we're never even educated about through medical school. And so I kind of stumbled. We didn't have Google and its like capacity that you guys have it right now. This is 20 something years ago. But I stumbled upon, this Society of Holistic Medicine or Board of Holistic Medicine, went to some of their conferences, and like, it was just like, what are they talking about? Like, leaky gut? What's that? Like, what is all this language? I've never heard this before, but it got me super curious. It introduced me to Chinese medicine, which I feel like saved me to a certain extent in terms of the way they think and the way they thought about the body and how it worked together. And I then studied Chinese medicine and learned a lot about the gut-brain connection, the gut-hormone connection, but in Chinese medicine language, not in our conventional language. And I was getting better, and as I continued sort of pursuing knowledge for my sake, totally selfish, I learned more and more about my body and my body chemistry, learned I had a gluten issue, learned my thyroid was off, ultimately learned, and it took me a year more to get to that point, but learned that I had PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is very common, kind of in the Southeast Asian community. Now we know that. We didn't know that back then. But that was driving a lot of what was going on with me. But through that entire year and a half long journey of doctor's appointments, no one ever checked my hormones. Nobody ever checked my nutrient levels. Nobody looked at gut function. There was no testing on me done whatsoever. And it took the Chinese medicine practitioner, nutritionist, kind of the sort of holistic community to be like, this is what I think is going on with you, that we could then validate in lab work and stuff like that. And what I found on me then kind of applied to my entire, at least my side of the family, right? Like my mom has it, my sisters have it, my son has a gluten issue. So it's just like it brought a lot of like light onto many of the issues our entire family had been dealing with over time. So that's kind of how I entered the field, and still didn't think it was going to be a thing. I was still working the ER, right? Doing like, I think back then I was doing about 14, 15 shifts a month. But like all these people were asking me questions, like, how did this change? What did you do for that? I heard you studied this. And so I finally did the fellowship in integrative medicine with Dr. Andy Weil after I'd become a licensed acupuncturist and a nutritionist and all these other things. I think at that point, it was like, I might be able to do something with this. And then my husband was kind of like elbowing me like, okay, I'm tired of everybody asking you questions. I think you just need to do something with this, so that's kind of how it started.
Wow, that's such an incredible story. And I think so much of what you said, for you, you were in the ER, you're coming out of residency. That's a lot of stress. It, probably contributed to the cascade of things that you were experiencing at that time. And the women that Yasmin and I work with are dealing with this rampant issue of hormonal imbalance. So what do you think are the biggest obstacles that women face currently in our modern society that are really impacting their hormones?
Yeah, it's interesting because you realize I've been doing this work for, if you count the time on myself, for almost 20 years, running the clinics for about 15. But it's interesting to watch what's happening. And I feel like the hormone conversation or the hormone imbalances is only escalating. I feel like it's getting worse, not getting better. PCOS, maybe we didn't know enough about it back then, but I meet more and more women with PCOS, endometriosis, infertility, premature ovarian failure, unexplained hair loss, persistent acne, all these things, more so than even in kind of like the first 5 to 8 years of the practice. And I think there are multiple things at play. I think we are stressed as women. I think we just have to put that out on the table. I think I wrote about that in 2017. I think that women have a load on them, unlike our predecessors, where we are still sort of, burdened, however you want to describe it, but we're still kind of responsible for the majority of childcare and home care and family care and elder care, right? And the extended family care. But we're also out there earning a lot of money and really playing a financial role in the family. And I think, that duality, while it's very empowering in terms of the fact that we can do anything, I think it creates a load for women of all ages, even our teenagers, where cortisol levels are high and there's this sort of chronic state of inflammation. But I think there's our lifestyle, but then there is also our environment. And I think we have a highly toxic environment. It's hard to get healthy food, clean food anywhere, even in some of the healthiest establishments. I think, things like glyphosate and pesticides are now no longer, maybe you'll get exposed to them, but now it's like, yes, you are getting exposed to them. It's just a matter of how much, even if you're choosing organic and clean and all this stuff, because there's so much, cross contamination. I think that we have other chemicals that are at play too. And so I think that when we take, changing genetics, a changing environment, an increased toxic load, a lifestyle of higher stress and higher cortisol, and you mix all of that together, if like you were making something, I think it's just a recipe for hormone failure. And I think that unfortunately, what's happening is that when we think about women and hormones, we're kind of only thinking about them from an outcome standpoint, right? Like, oh, I need to get you pregnant, or you're in menopause, so I need to do HRT, but there's kind of nothing in between. There's nothing like, okay, you're not feeling good, you're tired, or you're not thinking well, or you're having mood swings. There's none of this sort of gray zone of understanding that this kind of, it's like insidious, right? Like this insidious hit on our hormones is changing us into different people. And the next thing you know, we're waking up and we're just angry at the world, or we're angry at our job, or we're angry at our partners, or we hate like whatever life we've built for ourselves. But, underneath all that noise is somebody who's just not feeling good. And I think that's where we have to rethink what it means to see the doctor, what health and wellness really mean. There's a lot of noise in the space, but what does that really mean? And start to craft, very strategic plans for ourselves, just as we would for a business or for anything else that we're trying to create.
So I'm sure women are listening, Dr. Taz, and they're like, man, that resonates so much. Even your own story, right? We aren't feeling like ourselves. Things are shifting, but they're getting dismissed. They're going to doctors, or even amongst their friend group. This was me for so long. It's like, oh, it's normal that you're not feeling good. And talk about cortisol. It was probably up the roof, like you said, from my teenage years, for years. So It's all kind of accumulated until my 20s and the really 30s, where I was like, okay, I have to do something and take control. So I'm curious, I'm sure this is a really big question, but where does one start? Whether it's managing the cortisol, I know you said that's a big part of hormonal imbalances, but someone's listening in, where should they kind of start archetyping their life to just feel better?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple ways to answer that question. And I think, if they're just not sure where to start. They just don't feel well, right? Very vague. I just don't feel good. I don't feel good in my body. I think one of the first things they should do is really start to take a look at just their life, and there's some basics. And I think I have this, we're doing some stuff, so it'll be up soon, but there's something that I call like a life inventory score or checklist, right? And there's some things on there that are honestly, before you dive deep into the wellness world, kind of things that you should just be looking at. And I failed most of these if I do this checklist on myself at the time that I was going through my own stuff. And the first is like, are you sleeping consistently? Do you sleep from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m.? Well, the answer for me was no. I was doing ER work, right? But there's something about sleeping between those times and getting deep sleep and REM sleep that resets the hormone axis, acts as an opportunity for detoxification, right? So sleep is the first one, yes or no. I think the second one is, are you eating consistently? Are you eating at regular intervals? And in those intervals, are you getting enough protein? It's been interesting to listen to all the noise around diets, right? And keto and fasting and this and that and all this other stuff. But we keep coming back, no matter what's in or out of fashion, or even maybe what your personal chemistry demands for a period of time. We keep coming back to this idea of blood sugar regulation, eating consistently, eating every 4 hours or so. And again, obviously choosing clean food, whole foods, and minimal processed foods. These are just basics, I think, like the 101 kindergarten, first grade level of trying to turn your health around. And I think then the third is, do you have a stress management plan, right? Because I have found, that I can give people beautiful plans of what to do, but if their cortisol and their stress levels or their life is structured in a way, they can't, A, they're not hearing me, and B, maybe they're hearing me, but they can't put it into action when they get back home. So I think the third part of sort of this life inventory is, how much time do you have for self-care and for self-nurture, which ultimately empowers you to nurture everybody else around you. And here are my minimums. Like, it should be at least 20 minutes a day, and it should be 2 to 3 hours a week. So you should have some of these daily rituals in place, where you're either, doing breath work or meditation, or you're getting outside, or, you're simply, sitting in a quiet corner in your house, but whatever it needs to look like for you, it should be at least 20 minutes a day. And then 2 to 3 hours a week is really what brings you joy. Do you like a good massage? Do you like to see your friends? What is it that you need to do? And I think, if you're not at least doing those three things, that's where you start. And sometimes that in itself can reset the cadence of how you're feeling, right? But oftentimes for many of us that have true like nutrient deficiencies or gut issues or hormone imbalances, that stuff's not going to be enough. And so that's when you start doing the deep dive and you start looking into, what do your numbers look like? What do your levels look like? And then this book in it's been a year. It's hard to believe it's been a year. Let me pull it up. But in the Hormone Shift, we write all about it, and in there, I had someone tell me, a friend actually told me recently that she took the entire list of things I recommend testing, went into her doctor, and they tested it, and she compared it to our, what we recommend and what we've seen in practice that's optimal, and was able to make changes that way. So I think, getting hormone literate would probably be sort of, the next iteration of really being proactive after you've accomplished maybe those first three pillars, because we as women in particular are very hormonal creatures. And I think we're very sensitive to the fluctuations of our hormone levels and what they're doing. And the more hormone literacy you can have about your own body and start to tie things together, you're way ahead in the game. And this is true for our teenagers. This is true for women in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, even into their 60s. This is a theme that just resonates. It's the thread that kind of ties women together through all the different ages and decades.
I love that. I was just sharing with Yasmin because my cycle returned after having a baby for the first time recently.
Yeah.
And I was telling her, wow, how profound is it to feel these shifts? And like, women are very sensitive beings, and to feel everything, like feel how I felt in my luteal phase, feel how I felt with all my postpartum hormones dropping after like kind of being on a high of being pregnant. And it's kind of amazing just how sensitive we are as creatures, and how the world is not really set up for us to feel those things and to thrive in that way. I want to kind of go back to something that you were talking about before when you were sharing your story, because I do think a lot of people's introduction into the space of health can be for vanity purposes, because they might feel tired, but they don't really do anything until they start to put on weight or they start to lose hair. So like, for example, in your case, you were talking about hair loss, and I know a lot of women who, again, in the South Asian community have PCOS and experience those symptoms like acne or hair loss and things like that. I'm looking at your hair now. It's beautiful. Could you kind of take us through, for people who are listening, who are kind of experiencing those things, that they feel it could be a big hit on your confidence to kind of look in the mirror and feel like you don't recognize yourself. I would love for you to just kind of talk about maybe something specific like hair loss, and maybe what you did or what you recommend to some of your clients or patients that you work with.
Yeah. I mean, I sometimes laugh that hair loss did bring me into the conversation, right? So vanity did bring me in, and I was used to, and my mom still like wrings her hands. She's like, you have the best hair in the family, like had this big head of hair, And so yeah, that's what, unfortunately, I ignored the fatigue. I ignored the joint pain. I ignored like all the other like humming symptoms, but that one was the one that was not only obvious to me and kept me very embarrassed. Like I would get ready with like the lights off and like be super embarrassed in pictures and stuff like that. But it was also the one that everybody around me noticed more so. I could hide everything else, right? But that was the one that was really tough to hide. So, losing your hair is a big deal. It's a big deal for women. It's actually a big deal for men too. I think they feel the same sense of shame. And I know it's a combination of shame and panic, so once you start losing your hair and you start to see areas of the scalp, you start to panic, and every hair that falls, you're like, oh my God, is it happening again? Oh my God. And to this day, it's been, I'm 52 now. So it's been like what, 20 something years, 25 years or so that I've had this issue, to this day, my hair will wax and wane. And there are moments where it's amazing, but if I've gone through a stressful event, gone off routine, I start to see the signs come right back. The deal with hair is that, when we're talking PCOS, there's still a couple of different types of hair loss. And so this is where really working with somebody ideally is going to be your best bet. But even just understanding kind of the background of hair, I think is important. So there are a couple of different types of hair loss. There's hair that's just coming out of the crown. Like you can put your hand in and you can pull it right back out. I always call that thyroid hair. It's just falling, but the texture and the diameter hasn't changed that dramatically. Then there's hair that's miniaturizing, right? So if you have thick, coarse strands, now all of a sudden they're getting brittle and crackly. They almost sound like paper, when you start to move your fingers across them. That's androgen hair, and that's an oilier scalp as well, with the hair follicles miniaturizing, and then ultimately the hair falls out. And then there's just postpartum, right? There's the loss of estrogen and progesterone, and you'll see it in women in perimenopause and menopause too. They lose hair kind of like right here in the temples. So that's the other type of hair loss. And then the last one is nutritional or stress related, where you're just not getting blood flow to the scalp, or you don't have the right nutrients for healthy hair growth, and the hair's getting brittle and dry and ultimately, falling out as well. So there are different types of hair loss. When you're thinking about how to repair hair, it's very difficult to repair hair if you have a hormone issue. You can do, people always ask me about all these different products, on the market, but it's very difficult to see, results with any of them if you don't have a clear sense of where the hair loss is coming. So with high androgen hair, you need something to block androgens, and then maybe the other stuff will work. If you have lost estrogen and progesterone, you need some support in rebuilding those hormones, and then maybe the other things will work. So I think, when it comes to hair, it's not, again, like many things, it's not like one size fits all, but it's, again, trying to identify what the root cause is and then building a plan from there.
But even that alone, your explanation is so helpful for people, because I think that a lot of people don't even know where to start. They're like, I'm just experiencing this hair loss. I didn't know that it could be from these different causes.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm so curious, Dr. Taz. I know you mentioned how pivotal Chinese medicine was on your own healing journey. You went and continue to practice that. That's something I'm beginning to explore just for myself. I'm always thinking about what are ways to kind of help me increase that self-care, manage stress. And acupuncture has been wonderful so far. And I'm, dabbling a little bit into Chinese medicine, but I'm curious, as an MD and as someone who is practicing, like, how do you combine both worlds, whether, Chinese medicine and the work that you're doing on the Western side? I think it's just so fascinating. It's something I'm beginning to learn more about.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I feel like the best medicine really does combine both and is able to flex between both very easily. And, the art of doing this and the art of being a practitioner is knowing which sort of lever to pull at any given moment, right? We have a toolbox that starts with like lifestyle modification, diet, nutrients, herbs, supplements, hormones, all of that. But then there's this other end of trying to make decision. Does this person now need a medication, a prescription, an x-ray, a procedure like a surgery, like what do they need? And I think, that is something that I'm super passionate about educating doctors about, so they're able to deliver this for their patients. But we've developed a methodology within our clinics that does exactly that and helps guide the practitioner, but also helps the patient understand what to do when. And I think the way that methodology works is by simply doing it all. And we'll do conventional history and physical exams and all the stuff that we learned in medical school. We'll do data analysis and laboratory testing, but we're also doing Chinese medicine diagnostics, Ayurvedic medicine diagnostics, energy diagnostics. So we can take like this stuff that we're learning over here and this stuff we're learning over here, and then we can be strategic about it. So, you might be gaining a ton of weight, but if I get back that you're high anxiety, right? Putting you on a strict weight loss plan is not the first step. You actually need to manage your anxiety first, and then we back our way into a weight loss plan, right? The flip can happen too. We can have people that come in and they're super depressed and they end up on antidepressants. But when you use this sort of mixed approach, we can identify the meridian that's off in Chinese medicine, which leads us to, oh my gosh, it's your hormones. Let's get your hormones corrected and checked. And then we can manage the depression that way, which didn't really need depression antidepressants, but it needed hormone balancing and a little bit of support in that direction. So we definitely have established a methodology. We call it the Power RX methodology. It has 10 foundational pillars of health, and we address those in the exam rooms with our patients, trying to see where they fit in. And then sometimes it's a very technical, very data-driven, very medical plan. Sometimes it's a very emotional, very energetic plan, because that's what the patient needs. And I think, the art of doing medicine and the joy of doing medicine is being able to decide what the person in front of you needs, and then watching them step forward on a healing journey and get better, at the end of it or through it. And I think that's the fun part. We've taken that away for the doctor. We've definitely taken that away for the patient. Right now, it's very transactional. It's like, you have this, you take this, you have this, you take this. And it's this very linear sort of assembly line approach to medicine, which is not fun for us and is certainly not great for the patient.
That's so cool. I love that you guys do it that way. And I'm curious because so many of the women that Yasmin and I work with, they try seed cycling because they have really bad PMS. And what we've often noticed is that there is an imbalance between estrogen and progesterone. Namely, there is too much estrogen in relationship to progesterone. So there's estrogen dominance there, which is also what I had. How does energetic medicine and Chinese medicine play into this PMS and estrogen dominance?
Oh my gosh, I love this question. And there's actually a chapter in the book on it for people who are open and willing to go there. So Chinese medicine and even Ayurvedic medicine to a certain extent believed in this whole concept of energy, and tied to energy in their diagnostic system were not only symptoms, physical symptoms, right? Like heavy periods, breast tenderness, all these different things, but were also emotional issues that were sort of connected to these physical symptoms, and even energetic or vibrational issues that were connected to these very same physical symptoms. So to give you an example and bring it down a little bit, anger in Chinese medicine is stored in the liver. So women that experienced a lot of anger would typically have a lot, and this is using Chinese medicine language, would have a lot of liver meridian stagnation or liver meridian deficiency, one of the two, depending on where they were. But here's the catch. The liver meridian, when we think about the liver and the liver meridian, first of all, the liver, we know from regular medicine, is responsible for hormone detoxification. It does phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification, moves hormones through the body effectively. Estrogen dominance happens because that liver's gotten super sluggish. But if we flip back to Chinese medicine, that sluggish liver, they're thinking about not just the organ, they're thinking about the entire channel of energy that runs through the liver. That channel of energy runs through the breast as well. So they would tie disorders of the breast to repressed anger and a repressed emotional state that women experienced, that then in turn turned into something like a breast disease, whether it was lumps or cancer or any of those things. And I'll tell you in practice, one of the things, that I've been fortunate, unfortunate, however you want to think about it, is that when I sit with women and they are undergoing something, heavy or traumatic, right? Maybe it's a divorce, or maybe it's something at work that's a big deal, not just that you're changing jobs, but some sort of betrayal of some kind. I often tell them I can clock it. In 18 months, we're going to be dealing with something. And more than likely, we're going to be dealing with something with the breast. And that happens time and time again. So in order to prevent that, here's what we need to do. So there's an emotional undercurrent to all of our hormones, right? And in the Hormone Shift, I talk about it, like the hormone pattern, the emotion that goes with it, the liver or the Chinese medicine diagnosis, the Ayurvedic medicine perspective on this, and how it is all connected. And balancing hormones is not just about HRT and IVF, right? It's also about what's your emotional state, what's your energetic state, what's going on there, and how that's influencing, the rhythm of your hormones.
Wow, that's so interesting to me.
Yeah.
And I also wonder if there's like generational trauma involved in some capacity, right? Because in my family, estrogen dominance and estrogen related cancers are very common. And my mom had breast cancer. My aunt died of breast cancer, both estrogen positive. And I know that there was a lot of anger and everything with the way they grew up, anger toward their father, toward spouse, whatever it is. And I wonder how that is carried through the lineage or carried through genes and stuff. So that's so fascinating. I definitely want to look into that for sure.
Well, it is carried through. I mean, this may take us out into the woods here, but
we love it.
I mean, I think there does need to be more work done on this topic. I did a TED Talk back in 2017 that talked about this a little bit, but I think it was a little bit ahead of the way of where a lot of thinking was at the time. But here's what we know. The hypothalamus sits in the brain, right? Regulates both the hormone axis and the nervous system. And so what we do know is that the hypothalamus is where we store emotions and memories and all of these different things within our cells. Those cells transmit generation to generation, often unchanged, through the maternal line. So many of us are walking around with a maternal lineage, right, that has the history kind of coded in there. So it's the history of our grandmothers and our great grandmothers and all that other stuff. So it's very hard to proved from a scientific model standpoint, right? But here's what the research does agree, that that is where emotions and memories are stored, right? And if you start to understand that that mitochondrial DNA is unchanged, it kind of opens you up to, are a lot of us, and if we flip to the Southeast Asian lens in particular, I don't know, where there has been a lot of sort of, patriarchy issues and all that other stuff, are we entering with an already inflamed hypothalamus, right? We're already coded a little bit, so to speak. And then we add all the other stressors of life on top of that. I think the whole world of like intergenerational wounds and trauma and health and history is an opening field. I find it fascinating, which is why I wanted to talk about it in 2017. And what made me talk about it was just observation within our own family, right? Like I had this mom who was nervous, insecure, but like brilliant, beyond brilliant, gorgeous, all those other things, but just never like rooted in herself and sure of herself. And she took a lot of bold moves for a woman of her time. Like she got divorced, she did these things, which were very frowned upon, right, in our community. And, she did it, but there was this hesitancy, and there was it's a look in the eye that I couldn't understand. Then you get to me, and I kind of had the same thing going on. And I always excused mine because I was the only brown girl in a Southern community. And I faced a lot of like, sort of silent racism or feeling like I'm on the outside, those type of things that we've all been through. So it's nothing, it's just, it is what it is. And so, and then on top of that, I grew up in a very dysfunctional home. So I'm like, okay, mine is from that. Mine is because like of our childhood home. Mine is because of the schools and where I grew up and not really having role models that look like me. Mine is because of all of that. Then I have this daughter who couldn't have a more stable, happier home with a dad that dotes on her and adores her, a community that's very mixed and varied, right? Still in the South, but a very mixed community overall. She's got the same look in her eye and the same sort of insecurity. And it just puzzled me. I'm like, why? Like, why, when you've got a different environment, why do you have these same sort of tendencies? So that got me like digging into like science and research and thinking through this. And this truly is a pattern that like each of us generationally can mitigate it and undo it. But there's work to be done. We can't just accept it. Like there's work to be done to understand that we have this history that we've inherited. We have to use it to educate us, but not to limit us as we move forward,
I hope that there will be more tools in the future for people to navigate that, because I definitely relate to it. I'm assuming you're talking about your daughter.
Yeah. Very much. Yeah.
I relate to that, growing up in a very loving home, but still feeling all of the heaviness from my mother and wondering all the things. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I just have goosebumps listening to you because this is now going in a whole other woo-woo section, but because we're kind of there, guys, I can't tell you, every like medium, psychic, tarot card, energy worker that has worked on me always brings up the lineage piece. But I feel that like everything that you're saying, Taz, is completely how I also feel. And just also looking at the bold moves that like my grandmother has taken moving to America, my mom, all the trauma she's gone through, also a divorce, taking the lead when it wasn't so common. I'm like, my God, if you really reflect back on all these generational shifts, like so much has happened. So it's just such a fascinating conversation. Yeah, I don't think we ever got into it in our podcast before, but I'm very curious.
I'm so curious about it. I mean, I'm running a lot, but someday when I slow down, I definitely want to explore that more and even explore our maternal history a little bit more and kind of understand, like there were a lot of very incredibly powerful and strong women, through our family line, but it'll be interesting to know more about their stories because we only hear the good stuff, right? Because it's our oral tradition. You only hear all the good stuff, but it would be interesting to learn more detail if that's even possible,
And, I have a question, just kind of going back to Chinese medicine. I find it so interesting how you were saying, the different meridians and energy and the organs. And I think that's helpful. I go into my doctor and I've seen so many different Chinese medicine doctors and she gives me all these herbs and I just trust her. And I actually, she mixes it up depending on where I am in the cycle. I know KS sees me take it. It's quite a bit of stuff. I'm just like, what do these herbs do? And I know a lot of people also take the herbs. Does it impact the energy? Like what is going on in the body? Because I'm not too familiar with that.
Yeah, Chinese, the traditional Chinese medicine practitioner often does that, right? They have herbal formulas that have been handed down. Some of them are generational too, right? They've been handed down over time. And what they're doing is they're diagnosing you, looking at your pulse and your tongue, and they're changing. Here's what I love about Chinese medicine too. They're usually changing what you need based on what the body's telling you versus, again, Western medicine, which is like, take this, you're going to need to be on it for X amount of time. And then there's no like endpoint or there's no change in that. So they could be doing a number of different things. There are herbs that boost progesterone levels, right? There are herbs that calm the shen or calm down your mental sort of anxiety, cortisol, whatever word we want to use. There are herbs that help with detoxing and improving liver health, right? There are things that are like Dong Quai, which boost estrogen production for people that have, low estrogen. So, there are a litany of herbs and herbal formulas. There are a lot of Chinese herbal formulas that are specific to women's health that are actually very powerful. There's one in particular that I think, honestly got me better. And, so I think that's probably some of what she's doing. So she's most immediately impacting your chemistry is what she's doing, but she's indirectly impacting your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, which is then going to help bring the cortisol down. It's going to take down that hypothalamic inflammation that we are talking about and get you to a place where it's easier for the body to heal.
I want to talk about perimenopause because we have a few people in our community and friend group and family who are navigating that stage of life. And it feels very jarring for them. It feels like overnight almost in a way, things have changed and they're not sleeping, the libido's low, they just don't feel like themselves, their emotions are all over the place. So, there's not really much of a way that perimenopause is handled in conventional medicine, I don't think. I've actually only been hearing conversation around perimenopause really within the past 10 years. How do you navigate perimenopause and these like sudden shifts that come and help women tackle this stage that almost feels like they're losing their sense of identity?
Well, I write a lot about perimenopause in the Hormone Shift. And again, there's a whole game plan for women to help with everything from just where are my hormones to what symptoms match what hormones to what herbal remedies might help me with these different symptoms. I really wanted it to be a handbook, for women for sure. But perimenopause does, and first of all, perimenopause can start at 35. It can go all the way to 55, but it's about hormone irregularity. And then it looks different for everyone, but the usual classic sign is a drop in progesterone or a pattern of estrogen dominance. And women are navigating that and that sort of altered cycle between the two or altered levels between the two, which is making them feel like they're going insane. I think the key is there are so many resources today, whether it's my book or some of the other experts that are out there, is to get, again, hormone literate. You have to understand what your levels are. You have to be open to checking them repetitively so you can track and look at patterns and trends. And that way you get a sense of what's happening with you and you can start to put the pieces together, And so I think that's something that women, should start to really pay attention to when they notice too that their symptoms are cyclical, get those levels checked and start to understand what's going on there.
And progesterone seems to be such a big part of the conversation now, where I don't think we knew there was a lot of conversation around estrogen, but not as much around progesterone. But it's so important. And when it comes to people navigating infertility, or like you mentioned, going through perimenopause, what are natural ways that we can work on our progesterone before we get to that piece of hormone replacement therapy?
Well, seed cycling is one, right? I'm sure you guys talk about that. I think that's one thing that we can definitely use. But remember, losing progesterone is sort of equivalent in Chinese medicine. They talk about losing qi. It's your first sign that you're losing native energy in the body. And building energy is about optimizing your nutrition, making sure your gut is nice and healthy, getting enough healthy fats. That's a big one. I feel like a lot of women are not getting the fat that they need, and we need fat to build hormones. So a quick check you can can do is to make sure your total cholesterol level is actually above 130. If it's dropping too far below that, then we know that you don't have the raw materials to make a hormone, including progesterone. And then after that, I love adding in just our basic minerals, like magnesium is really important for progesterone. I think that chaste tree, which is an herb, or vitex, it's an herb that I've used quite frequently. That's another one that I like when it comes to managing progesterone as well. So these are some of the things that you can start to look at to help your body build progesterone more naturally.
And I love this more basic question because, taking back to the initial foundation that you said, like the checklist, like, are you eating 3 meals a day? Are you sleeping enough? Are you managing stress? Those 3 things for me, I still have that checklist in my head. And I've been in this world for now 5 years on my own journey. So I love that. And one thing that I still try to, that's actually a little bit more difficult for me, is making sure I'm getting all those nutrients. So you said how important healthy fats are, and I'm still trying to make sure I get that. So I'm curious from your perspective, because I know nutrition is big in what you preach. What is an optimal meal, right? Like you said, healthy fats are really important. Like, how important is fiber? I'd love to just kind of get your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I think there's so much about food, right? And how to
Yeah.
eat and what to eat and all that other stuff. I mean, I don't think it's that hard. I think what makes it hard is probably the availability of every type of food out there that we can get our hands on. But I think the way most of us need to think, and there are definitely exceptions, and there are people with food allergies and food intolerances that, like I have the gluten issue, other people have an issue with corn or dairy or soy or some of these different things. But I think overall, it's getting a decent amount of protein in. Half your plate is some sort of plant-based, fiber-based food, usually vegetables of some kind. And then getting in a small serving of a starch or a carbohydrate, which can be satisfying. And then adding fat to those things, right? So maybe you drizzle a tablespoon of olive oil on your vegetables, or you add a quarter teaspoon of ghee. You don't need a lot, but you need a little bit to kind of like really get all the nutrients you need and kind of get these numbers to match up to where they are. Now, it is helpful to track and see what you're doing just to get educated. Again, it's just like getting educated about your hormones. Sometimes keeping a food diary or a food log will help you. Like I'll have patients do that all the time, and I'll take two looks at it. I'm like, you're not getting enough protein, or you're not getting enough fiber, So sometimes having somebody do that for you, or you even starting to take a hard look at that by writing everything down, can be helpful. But it's pretty simple. You need protein, you need fat, you need fiber, you need a little bit of starch to really satiate, for satiety and that type of thing. And then you need to eat at regular intervals, So I think that's probably everybody's baseline. I think where we go wrong is that we start to get into the world of extremes, right? Where we fast for 16 hours, or we go to keto and we do that for an extended period of time, or we undereat and start cutting and cutting, or we just don't even know what a portion is. We don't even know how much, 4 ounces of a protein is, and we're eating 2 or 3 times that amount. I still to this day get surprised. Like, if I go to, a health resort and they're measuring everything and putting it out, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's really all we should be eating. Like the portions are really small, So we have a culture of excess, and we have, this sort of information overload. So I think we're all just engaging in the extremes, whereas probably we just need to be nicely balanced and eating consistently. Now, when you have high cortisol, or when you're super stressed, all that regulation of your appetite, the ability to feel full, the ability to feel satisfied, all of that gets thrown off. And then again, we resort to extreme measures to correct that. So I think we just get caught in that loop.
When I was growing up, a lot of the women or young girls that I knew that were dealing with PCOS were pretty much offered one solution, which was birth control pills or hormonal birth control. What is your advice to anyone who's listening to this who has a daughter who's navigating PCOS? What would you tell them to start looking at?
I think look at your diet. I think that's the number one. Look at diet and look at gut health, especially in a young girl, right? That's an opportunity to really start to make those changes. And I know I have a teenager. I know how stubborn they are. I know how difficult it is to get through, but you're really doing the greatest amount of service if you can help them arrive at, oh my gosh, when I eat X, Y, and Z, these symptoms get worse. Because I think that's going to be a foundational piece of their health as they go into their 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond. So I think that's really important. I think that helping your daughter understand that tracking hormones and understanding what hormones are doing is important. So where is your cycle? Are you getting it in a regular fashion? Are you going for 3 or 4 months without getting it? And if so, what could be causing it? And then I do agree in testing our teenagers, before they go off to college. I think it's such a gift to be able to say, here's your health. These are your deficiencies. These are your strengths. This is what your hormones do. Be aware of it. Because as you go into the next 10 years of your life, where you may be living lots of different types of lifestyles, you're prepared. Like when you're getting in trouble, when you're doing well, how to kind of get back to doing well. And you're sort of set up for that next phase of your 30s when most of us are family building. So I think, I would get them educated. I would engage them in these conversations, and I do think one thing with TikTok and all this other stuff that I see with my daughter, there is a lot of talk around wellness. They are talking a lot about it and she's fascinated by it. But again, it's like, what do you do? Like, what do you do next? And I think beyond just something being a trend, dialing into your personal health and having that personal plan for you is super important.
Totally. It's such a gift that they're getting that information now, because Yasmin and I always say now in our 30s, we wish
Oh,
that somebody would have talked to us when we were
Yeah.
teenagers and said, hey, if you care about all this stuff now, it's going to make life so much easier as you get older and your body becomes a little less resilient. So I think social media can be so beautiful in that way.
I love that. Well, Dr. Taz, we're so just fascinated with your approach to medicine and again, that Eastern and Western mix. And we know you have a massive initiative coming out, your holistic health platform. Please tell us everything because we're just so, so excited for this to be out in the world.
Yeah, this has been, something, again, a little bit of an unexpected journey, but it all makes perfect sense now. I've spent about 15 years building my clinics, seeing patients, doing media, all this other stuff. And I sort of had this epiphany that as I was going, because a lot of times I'm just moving like many of us are and doing things and making things and creating things. But I was still hearing the same story from everybody that they didn't know where to go. They didn't know who to turn to. They didn't know like which resource or which expert to really fall back on. And now even with sort of the availability of all these different tests and all this different stuff, people are just as confused, to be 100% honest. So kind of had this vision that it just needs to all be in one place. So we're launching the Whole Plus platform coming up in January. It's really going to be a one-stop shop for all things. You'll have all kinds of resources on there if you just want to learn about symptoms, about hormones, about conditions. But we also have a community where you can learn from others, be mentored by me and some of the other providers in our clinics. And then we're growing and scaling our clinics across the country so that you can be a patient as well. But really trying to tie this journey together from education to empowerment to really having a plan that works for you. And we're super excited about it and have been designing and planning and implementing and doing all the things. But we really hope it'll be this amazing resource on merging Eastern and Western medicine, thinking about medicine in a different way, really to everyone around the world, so that we can kind of turn down this noise and this sort of finger pointing of that's wrong and you're right and blah, blah, that's BS and all this other stuff, that we keep hearing, and really have this sort of unified approach in terms of healing the body. So I'm sort of, super excited about it, thrilled about it, can't wait for it to launch, and really hope it does what it's supposed to do out there in the world.
I'm sure it will. I mean, the amount of women and people I feel like that text or reach out to Can I, like, who should we talk to? I'm like, we are always just trying to match make people. So the fact that you're creating this platform out there and the way you're approaching it just seems incredible. And you've already done just so much education and content right now. And, we'll share all your information on your books and social, and this new platform as well. But no, Dr. Taz, this was such a blast. I feel like we could talk to you for so long about all things. It could go to so many different parts, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Taz.